Now, my next guest you've met before in Late Lunch. However, it's quite a while since he's been here, and a lot has happened with him in the interim, with a new book deal in the can and a photographic exhibition on the horizon. I'm delighted to say hello again to Anthony Murphy. Anthony, it really is great to see you.
Good afternoon, Jerry.
Thank you very much for joining me. Can I tell you how we spotted you? Listen to this for an analogy. I sees a picture of Anthony on Facebook, and there he is, like a Premiership footballer, pen in hand, signing on the dotted line. He might as well be signing for Manchester City. Tell us what that's all about.
Well, I'll tell you, if I could make that kind of money from writing books, that would be great. That was me putting pen to paper on a contract for my next book, which is going to be published, all going well, in late October, early November. It's going to be a work of non-fiction. So the Liffey Press, who published two of my previous works, including Island of the Setting Sun, which I wrote with Richard Moore, and Newgrange Monument to Immortality. So this is my fifth book and my third work of non-fiction.
And it's going to be called Mythical Ireland? Mythical
Ireland, yes. Yeah, and same name as my website.
Yes, ties in with you. Yes.
New Light on the Ancient Past.
And this will be a series of images of the great mythology and monuments and everything that we have here in the Northeast.
Yeah, well, mostly images of the monuments and the landscape. That have been taken over the past 4 or 5 years since my last book, actually.
It is a while. I said that in the beginning. We haven't met in such a bit of time, but so it will be images, and obviously you have to write around this and bring it to life.
Yes, exactly. Yes. So it's really a sort of a. It looks at the monuments and the myths, and it goes in a little bit deeper, because I think that, as I'm always saying to people, myth has meaning. It had a purpose, and it still has a purpose. That mythology isn't actually pure storytelling. There is meaning underlying it all that's important, or in the past was important for people to get them through life. And I believe that there is still a relevance to it, today.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because earlier in the week we were talking about fairy forts.
Yeah.
This came from Danny Healy-Rae and Kerry and the Roads, and we took it up here on the day as well. And what you're saying there, that goes way back.
Oh, yeah.
But you'd believe that has relevance today as well?
Well, I haven't focused in on the fairies quite so much. They are a sort of a later development of a much earlier theme, which surrounds the early gods, the Tuatha Danann and the like, who are strongly associated with the monuments. But the really curious thing about a lot of the folklore and the mythology is the meaning that can be extracted from it, and then the way that folk memory actually seems to recall events from much, much earlier times. I mean, a very good example of that in the forthcoming book is the folklore in the early 1960s that was dismissed out of hand by some archaeologists about Newgrange, that said the sun shines in here on the solstice and illuminates the triple spiral in the chamber, like, for instance, that it was covered in white quartz, which in the early 60s couldn't have been known because all the white quartz was buried under the cairn.
Correct.
And all of that later turned out to be true. And the question has to be asked, well, the archaeologists tell us that Newgrange collapsed about 500 years after it was built. So we're talking about 4,500 years ago it collapsed, and the cairn material slipped out, covered the entrance and all the curbstones, and that remained buried until 1699 AD, when the local landowner Charles Campbell rediscovered the entrance to the passageway. So for 4,000 years Newgrange is completely blocked up, and yet there's folklore in the Boyne Valley before it was excavated saying, yeah, there's white quartz under there, incredible stuff.
Yeah. It just shows you as well that, you can't take everything at face value either. Or, it's a real example of something from ancient history that is there and then is discovered.
Yeah.
The book is a non-fiction book, and this is your third non-fiction.
Correct, yes.
Now, when you pitch to a publisher, I'm curious about this. Right? If you have fiction, you generally have the full manuscript, and you go to a publisher and say, this is. With this, am I right in saying that you have an outline for this, a concept, and then you must build beyond this?
Generally, with non-fiction, you have to produce, a synopsis. A one-page synopsis plus it depending on the publisher, several chapters, maybe one, but in some cases 3 or 4, a portion of the work, so that they can basically advise you as to whether they think you should continue in that vein or whether you should take a different direction with it. So it is different to fiction. With fiction, you generally have to have a completed package before you even think about publisher, you know.
Is there more pressure in non-fiction when you do sign on the dotted line and say you have a deadline and then the clock is ticking?
I think it's just a different type of pressure. The pressure that's on me now is to produce a certain amount of material between now and the deadline. Some of it is already written. Quite a bit of it is already written. So I have quite a lot of editing and rewriting to do, basically. But the reason it's pressurised is because I work full time and I'm involved in other things. As
he has a day job, folks. He really does.
You know, people talk to me on Mythical Ireland on Facebook and by email and on the website, and they think, you know, that this is my job and my income. This is just a passion and it's a glorified hobby is all it is, although I'd like it to become a vocation, very much so, you know. So they're a little bit surprised when you tell them, well, actually I have this thing called a day job that I have to do as well.
But you know what, it is the love of it and the enjoyment that brings you along, and all that you get from it, and the pride, I know, when you've been here in the past with the lovely work that you've been produced, and that is to look forward to. Now that's one aspect, but since you've been here, I was saying quite a bit has changed work-wise with you, and this photography that you've got into.
Yeah.
Oh my word. It's something else that's grabbed you, or you grabbed it, which...
Well, I think it really started in earnest when I started researching the monuments, which is, by the way, the year 1999. It's 18 years ago now, with Richard Moore. Actually, it was him that got me. It's all his fault.
Good man, Richard.
But in conjunction with all the research, I just found I enjoyed taking pictures of the monuments, and then I just started getting into different types of photography. Like I would quite often be at ancient sites late in the evening or in the night time, and I'd be using torches and flashes to illuminate them, and you know, painting with light is what that's called. And that just became a thing for me. I just really fell in love with not necessarily clicking a camera in the middle of the day when the light is harsh and, you know, you might get blue sky, but I find that the best times for photography are what we call in photography the blue hour, which is the hour before sunrise and the hour after sunset, when you get that lovely deep blue twilight, and the golden hour, the first hour of the day and the last hour of the day, after the sun has come up in the morning when it's still low, and you know, it creates this golden light across the landscape, and the same in the evening. And oftentimes when you're there at those times, you encounter interesting atmospherics like mist and fog and low cloud and stuff, so you can produce real ethereal images, you know. And I think that my photography has developed as I've gone deeper into the meaning. It's not just examining what the structures are and retelling the stories. I've gone into the meaning of it, and that seems to have struck a chord with people. And as I've done that, the photography just seems to have evolved and got better and better, you know. But then you get more experience too, and you learn by your mistakes. And
when does this man sleep? I hear you all thinking out there. He's up late at night catching images. He gets up early in the morning and he's a day job. Isn't he remarkable? Stay with us on Late Lunch. Short break to take. More to chat with Anthony Murphy in a couple of moments. Myself and Anthony Murphy are laughing here because just as we went to the break, and you didn't hear it, Anthony says, I was saying to him how busy he is, night, noon and morning, and all he's doing the day job and this besides, and he said, and we never mentioned the band. We just got to call in, would you believe this, to say, is he still involved with the band?
Yeah, very much so, yeah. Still involved with Drogheda Brass Band.
And winning trophies and titles to beat the band?
The latest success was the South of Ireland Band Championships in Clonakilty with the youth band, and that was fantastic. Great day, lovely group of kids, and great performance. And we came second in a section of 16 bands, many of which would be adult bands. Really, really thrilled. A great day out. And all the videos of that are on YouTube, by the way. If people want to see them, have a look at those kids. They're absolutely fantastic.
The talent is unbelievable. And what about this man, for all the strings he has to his bow? Back to the photography for a moment. And you were talking there, before we broke, about the time of day, as the sun sets and it rises in the day. Very special times. I'm lucky being an angler because I know what you're talking about. I've spent a lot of years and time on the rivers, on the lakes at these times. And it's only when you're out there and you see the images, etc., and you can get a real feel for it. But you were bringing this to people through your website, Anthony Murphy Photography, as well. Check him out. Check that aspect of his life out as well. Let me ask you this about photography, because some of your scenes are remarkable. You are obviously using drone technology for some of your stuff, are you? What about that? What about the use of that and what it's opened up?
It's a fabulous tool for a photographer, a drone, because especially when you're picturing ancient monuments. I mean, for instance, the Hill of Tara is a classic example. The Hill of Tara can be quite disappointing. When you've seen the aerial pictures and then you go there, you're like, it can be hard to get an impression of the place. It's not like Newgrange and Nouth and Douth. It doesn't have the same stunning visual aspect to it. But when you see it from the air, it's a whole different thing altogether, And the drone technology didn't exist even 5-6 years ago. It's incredible how quickly things have advanced.
You've really mastered that, though. Is it difficult to become really au fait with that skill?
I suppose it just depends on your own sort of confidence and your own level of skills and this, that, and the other. I mean, I had an interest in aviation anyway, plus I've an interest in photography. So it didn't take me long to get used to flying it. And the thing about drones is you have to comply with the IAA regulations, the Irish Aviation Authority, and that's very important. There are unfortunately a few people who misuse them and who fly them in proximity to airports and stupid stuff like that. By and large, a lot of photographers that I know who have them have found them to be a fabulous tool in terms of producing a new type of image and a new type of video content that you couldn't get before. It's fabulous and it's relatively inexpensive,
And the camera built into the drone, it's part and parcel of it.
It is part of it.
What do you use when you are on the ground and you're shooting those lovely shots? What's your penchant for? Have you a brand? Have you a camera you love?
Oh, you mean the day to day?
Yes.
I'm a Nikon man, but people say, do you use Nikon or Canon or Sony or Fujifilm? I use Nikon because that's the system I invested in. So when you buy a camera, you then buy lenses for it and flashes, and they all work with Nikon, but they don't work with Canon. So, you invest in a system. I've used Canon and I've been very pleased with the results. Can't talk about Sony or Fujifilm, but I've been a Nikon man as long as I've been taking pictures, so I suppose that's the system. And I'm very, very pleased with the results. So,
oh my God, what you've turned out is remarkable. Now, I was looking at some of your repertoire on the photography end of things, and a recent post you had was about Drogheda's new courthouse, and you've a lovely picture up of the courthouse that you've taken yourself.
Yeah.
Now, this courthouse has prompted debate among the natives and more besides.
Yeah.
What do you think of it?
Well, from a photographer's perspective, I actually think it's quite a nice building. And I think it's much more picturesque, for instance, than if you go back to the Tiger years. For instance, the Haymarket buildings are not that nice in my opinion. Now, these big red blocks in the middle of the town, I don't like them. There's a lot of controversy about the Boyne Tower at the Bull Ring. I think it's a nice building. However, I know that a lot of people wouldn't. Yeah, it's funny. I was out the other night at the Blue Hour, as they call it, and my two daughters were with me. It was a lovely evening. We were taking pictures down the ramparts and along the bridge and along the river. And Drogheda, actually, by and large, is a beautiful town and a very picturesque town. And people don't realise that. I think some of the natives historically have been very hard on Drogheda. And I saw that with the debate about the courthouse, that it's an ugly monstrosity and it's grey and it's this, that and the other. It's okay. It's not the most gorgeous, nice building you're ever going to see. However, at the same time, it's very nicely lit and it makes a nice picture. So from my point of view, for instance, the building right next to it, which is the Abbey Shopping Centre, I think is an awful ugly block of a thing.
That was of the 70s, as we know, and it reflects that era. Let me put my cards on the table. I love the new courthouse, let me say. Personally, I think it's beautiful. The Boyne Tower, I'm on the other side from you. I think it's a nice building, but where it is, I think, is the issue.
Maybe, but I mean, if you look historically, and if you go on to, say, Drogheda down memory lane and you look at all the historic pictures, historically Drogheda had, as we always say, turned its back on the river, and there were a lot of very drab and derelict properties that fronted onto the river. I think it's improved quite a lot, but I wouldn't like to see the mistakes of, these big red blocks, for instance, It needs to retain some of its ancient character. So, for instance, there's a building there dating from the early 19th century in the form of Donaghy's Mill that, in the right hands, with the right sort of architects and artistic people looking at it, could be a gorgeous building. Housing some sort of a museum or a maritime museum about the maritime history of Drogheda, something along those lines. There's so much that could be done still. I think the courthouse is a nice addition.
The mill you mentioned, I pass it every day driving home from work, and I look at it and I see the holes appearing in the roof, the slates moving. Not good. And it's lying there years and years and years. Surely, there needs to be a prompt to somebody or something to happen with that.
Well, the longer time goes on, as you know, the more nature will reclaim that building, and the more expensive any work that's required will become. So I suppose the plea has to go out. Look, there's a lot of stuff happening in the community, which is great. The Lawrence Gate campaign, for instance, that's closing this day week. There's John Bannon and a couple of guys who've been cleaning up the old Abbey. They've been doing great work. There's another group there, I think Andy Murray, etc. There's a few people there who are trying to clean up the Buttergate, other sort of stuff. The community has kind of said to the politicians and the council, look, enough is enough. We've let this stuff, go to ruin long enough. And I think there's a real impetus there now, and I think that will help enormously when it comes to A, protecting what we have and preserving what we have, and B, then hopefully to make the right decisions in future about the future architecture in the centre of Drogheda, especially in the centre of the town and especially close to the river.
Watch this space. I love what you have to say. Let's see what happens. But there certainly is an action happening from the ground up. You can feel that, and you're so right with that one. So before we finish, let's pin you down. The book will be finished, completed, published and launched when?
All going well, I will present a manuscript to the publisher in the middle of September, which is only a month away, by the way, so no pressure. Somebody used to say that I worked with pressures for tyres. Right when you're in the worst pressure possible. And launched hopefully either the last week of October or the first week of November.
What a treat to look forward to at that time of the year, Mythical Ireland, and with the big day coming up on the 25th of December, I'm sure you'll have it out at the right time. And the exhibition?
I'm planning to hold an exhibition of photographs of Drogheda, in Drogheda, sometime probably in late November.
It's busy second half of 2017 for you.
Yeah, I know. Who are you telling?
Anthony Murphy, always a pleasure. It's been too long. We'll see you again soon. Thanks, you,
Sherry.
And good luck
Thanks
with the book
me
and the
in.
exhibition.
Thank you.
The Late Lunch with Blackstone Motors Drogheda. We now have the full 172 Renault range available to test drive in our showroom. For information on our latest special offers, see blackstonemotors.ie.
Ooh la la, Blackstone